How many good friends do you have? How many good friends would you say you have? How long does it take you to make a friend? How long does it take you to make a friend? That's an interesting question. From this perspective, it takes longer than I think we realize. And what I want to show this morning is if we're supposed to grow in this idea of growing in the knowledge of God, becoming friends with God, growing in knowing who God is, well, how much does that take us? How long is that going to take? Right? And it can feel daunting, like I can't get my arms around it. All right, so here's what I have. This guy, Jeffrey Hall, University of Kansas, did research on relationships. He said it takes you between 40 to 60 hours. 40 to 60 hours. That's a week of work to a week and a half of work straight of just having a casual acquaintance. So think about that in terms of your everyday, like some of you, so I was even thinking this week, there's that line in that song that you can't make new old friends. And some of us have had friends for a long time, and we now would say, man, that's a solid friendship, and we don't realize the time it's taken. Hey, I've known them since I was 8. I've known them since college. I've known them since high school. I've known them since, right? There's a long time that you've spent with somebody. Because it's going to take you 40 to 60 hours just to make an acquaintance. They say adults that it takes us, Jeffrey Hall, it takes up to 90 hours. 90 hours before you would consider someone moving past acquaintance that you might consider a friend. 90 hours. Now you say, well, man, if I work with them every day, but think about even you work with people every day that you don't care to spend time with. Right? So it's not just time with, it's got to be what? Got to be some other things that come into that. An interest on your part, communication. Maybe you're doing things outside. And then you factor in family, kids, and how busy you are and how isolated we get. What I want you to think about, us to think about today is this. I'm going to get here, I'm going to come back to this stuff. If we want to grow in knowing God, we've got to get to know Jesus. If we want to grow in our knowledge of who God is and what He's doing, I'm going to suggest to you that it's in the person of Jesus. Jesus came to put God on display. No one has seen God. The challenge becomes for us is if I go back here, and they did like 1,700 Christian adults over 2 years. And they asked this question, how often do Christians pray? And you can see by age group, 18 to 30, 30 to 50, 50 plus. How often do Christians pray? Here's a number that pray daily, weekly, less than once a month. Okay? The older you get, the more likely you are to be praying daily. The younger you are, the least likely you are to be praying daily. It's interesting. Why? I think, for one, younger people don't see a need. You don't see and it could be just like everything from like, I'm not into religion, I don't think it's valid. A lot of things could go into that. You get older and you realize maybe through the hurts and things of life that push us to God, that maybe I do need to pray, okay? So, how often do Christians pray? That was one question they asked. How long do you spend praying? Okay? So if you pray daily, what are people praying? How long? For what length of time? Less than 1 minute is the majority. Between 1 and 5 minutes, look at the drop off. Between 5 and 10 minutes here. More than 10. We don't pray. We shoot up popcorn prayers. It is my favorite joke that if I asked a guy and said, hey, what if we just went out and hung out for like 3.5, 4 hours? Most guys wouldn't have time for that. You seriously would look at me and say, I don't have time. There's just no way in my schedule. If I said to you, let's go play golf. Let me see, when do you want to go? Right? We don't spend time talking to God, and I want to point that out, not like in a guilt thing, but to say, well, why? Why is it? And I think one of the reasons is, honestly, we don't see the value. You don't see the value in spending time with God. Like, what benefit, what tangible benefit are you going to receive in your life from having spent time talking to God? If you're dating and you see a guy or a girl that interests you, you don't suddenly go, oh, let me just see here, like, man, I don't know, I can squeeze you in here. You're making time. You're talking. You're finding excuses to go hang with somebody. When it comes to our walk with God, we just don't see it as like that big a deal. Like, I'm not religious. I don't want to be considered religious, right? I'm not goody two-shoe. Like, and I don't even know. I mean, so we just don't. We don't spend the time. All right? They asked this question, why don't you pray more? And you can see overwhelmingly the number one reason is we're too busy. Followed closely by we're not sure what to say when we pray. Okay? But we are pretty busy people, right? Now, I looked at the stats this week. I just was Googling 2024. How much time do people spend on TV 2024? What does the data say? The average person spends, don't come up to me afterwards and say, I don't spend that much, because what you're doing is trying to self-deflect. I get it. I understand you're trying to, like, you're not that bad a person. Average person spends 3 hours a day watching TV. That's the average person. The average person who's on social media is on for 2.5 hours a day. You're scrolling, you're looking at reels for 2.5 hours a day if that's your thing. And I'm just saying, like, I don't think it's that we're too busy, that we don't have time. I want to go back to, I don't think that we see the value in it. It's just not that big a deal to us. Like, if you were to be more spiritual, if you were to talk to God more, if you were to pray more, if you were to study the Word more, wouldn't you honestly say, well, why? Why should I do it? Because I really got to scroll. I really got to binge watch Netflix. I mean, there's important stuff on TV. I understand it. And you're going to miss it if you spend time praying in the Word, right? So Paul writes to this group of Christians in this church in Colossae, and he says, I'm praying for you that you would live a life worthy of the Lord, you would please Him in every good way, you'd bear fruit in every good work, you would grow in the knowledge of God. You would be strengthened with power so that you would have great endurance and patience, and that you would joyfully give thanks to the Father. And I'm like, man, growing in the knowledge of God doesn't seem like that big a deal. Like, what are you going to get out of it? That's a valid question. So which pushed me back to this, right? Here's what I said. If you want to grow in knowing God, you got to get to know Jesus. There's a difference between knowing God and knowing about God. When you truly know God, you have energy to serve, you have boldness to share Him, and you're content in Him. As I grow in my walk with God, the things that challenge me in life, I'm able to face better. I'm going to share a stat with you a little bit. That the more time you spend in the Word, the less likely you are to give in to some of the stuff that maybe is troubling you. But that's all J.I. Packer is saying. It's easy to know about God. It's a little more challenging to know Him personally. So how do I do that? Well, one of the thoughts I had was, if you want to know God, you have to answer these two things, these two presumptions, right? You have to presume that He exists, that He can be known. I was thinking of it this way. How many of you believe in aliens? I don't care whether you do or not, but I was thinking of it this week. Like, I'm seriously, like the Area 51 stuff. You know, when we see the headlines, like those little lights that are flying over New Jersey, and they were alien aircraft, and every so often there'll be a guy on a jetliner who'll say, hey, I saw something. I mean, are aliens out there? I'll be honest. I don't know. I'm going to go another step and say, I don't care. I really don't care. So I haven't studied it. I don't care if they exist, and so I've not been motivated to look in to see if they exist. Because what if aliens do exist? I'm totally serious. What if there are aliens visiting our planet? Is it going to change your world? Be careful before how you answer that. Be careful how you answer that. If there are ETs out there, and the little guy that was so cute, right? We grew up with ET, he was harmless, right? And then we see aliens like come in starships, and they're like, you know what, man, I've just seen some movies where they're like coming out of the ocean and they're battling the Navy and they're blowing things up and they're like trying to dominate us. I mean, that would be bad if there were aliens that came to take over our world. At this point, I'm telling you though, it doesn't move my needle enough to think like, I just got to go find this out and I'm really losing sleep over this. Hear me. I think some of you treat God and Jesus the same way. It just doesn't move your needle enough that you care. Like, okay, even like you can come to church and be okay with that. But like, yeah, so what? If I'm going to grow in my knowledge of God, I've got to believe that He exists. That God really exists. If God really exists, what difference does that make? If there's a God and He's over all and supreme, and He really does rule today, He exists today, what difference does that make as you're sitting here, as you're watching online? You then have to ask yourself, can He be known? Can I know this God? Maybe He exists, and there are people who think, well, there's a God, because how did we get here? How did we get on this little spinning rock? Where did it come from? Right? I'm just not believing in the Big Bang theory that it all started from nothing and then we just evolved. That's a stretch. Truly, trust me. If you think you're not a person of faith, but you believe in evolution, you're a person of faith. I'm not trying to slam you. I'm just saying it's just as much a person of faith as someone who's putting their hope in Jesus. Right? Because where did it all start from? It came from somewhere. Right? If God exists, can we know Him? What's He like? What's He care about? What's He think about? What's He think about us? Does He even know that we're here? Are we just specks to Him? Like, is that even it? Like, we're just like living life and like whatever, we live and we die and then maybe we meet Him in the sky. I don't know. What if? Here's my premise to you. What if what Jesus said was true? That Jesus came to reveal God. One of the things I want us to understand here is that it takes both desire and time to grow in any relationship. You've got to want to. If I'm looking at you, and you look at me, and we say, man, should we be friends? And I say, I just don't want to get to know you. Just not interested. Right? There's no desire. Oh, I am so slammed. You really seem like a fun person. Why don't we get together Friday? Oh, I can't Friday. I'm booked. What are you doing a week from Wednesday? Oh, man, no, I don't have time there. What do you got like 6 months out? It takes both desire and you wanting to spend your time to get to know someone. If you have neither desire nor the time, you won't get to know them. Doesn't make you a bad person, just means that's how life works. If I want to get to know God, if I want to grow in my knowledge of God, if I want to grow in my knowledge of Jesus, I got to want to, and I'm going to have to spend some time doing it. And 1 minute a day when I'm watching TV for 3 would tell me, hear me, no slams, just tell me that like there's just not the desire. I want to watch Netflix. I want to watch sports. I want to watch the NCAA basketball. That's stuff I want to do. And so last night, I watched the Michigan State play last night? Night before last was Michigan State. 2.5, 3-hour Michigan State game. Because I wanted to. I want to know how Sparty's doing. Okay? You know what? I didn't watch Alabama Duke. Could care less. No interest. Therefore, no time. What if the same thing holds true and you could grow in your knowledge of God if you wanted to? Like it's not above you. Like it's not impossible for you to get close to God. But you're like back to what I started with. Why would you want to do that? Why? Who cares? Is it really going to help? Is it really going to benefit you to have a close relationship with Jesus? And I want to say, all right, before I answer that, let me tell us how, okay? Jesus came to show us what God is like. Look at verse 15 of Colossians 1. So Paul tells these people to grow in the knowledge of God. In verse 15, he says, he is the image of the invisible God. He's the firstborn over all creation. For by him, that's Jesus, all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by Jesus and for Jesus. He's before all things. In him all things held together, and he's the head of the body of the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile himself to all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Jesus came to show us what God is like. At Christmas, we say the word Emmanuel, which means God with us. God with us. Jesus is God with us. In Colossians 2, it says again, Paul says, in Christ, there was this fullness of deity. Eric Szymanski was up here a couple weeks ago. Eric showed us from the scriptures that Jesus was both fully God, fully man. But that is significant to know that in being fully God and fully man, Jesus came to put God on display. What is God like? Let me ask you a question. What does God think about people who are broken and messed up? Do you have a clue? Does God care? Well, how did Jesus respond to the woman who had 5 husbands and was fetching water at noon because she wasn't going to be welcomed any other time of day? How did Jesus treat her? How did Jesus treat the tax collector who had to hide up in a tree because they would have really tried to beat him up? But he said, hey, Zacchaeus, today I want to have lunch at your house. Can we go? What does Jesus think about death and dying and grieving? Does he care? I mean, you're going to go to heaven anyways, right? Why do we cry at funerals? Not that big a deal, right? Because we're going to heaven, right? Bible says we grieve, but not like those that have no hope. What did Jesus do at funerals? 2 things. He grieved. He shed real tears. When his friend died, he wept. It broke him. And then Jesus never went to a funeral they didn't mess it up. Every funeral Jesus went to, he turned it into a celebration. What does God think about death and dying and grieving? He cries over it. You have family that's disowned you? What was Jesus like? He had family disowned him. Yeah, we know who your mom is, but you say your dad's this guy, but we don't really know who your dad is, you illegitimate. You ever have people stab you in the back, talk about you? Jesus knows what that's like. If I want to know what God is like, I look to Jesus, who shows me what God is like, and then I want to say, as I look at the stuff I deal with in life, how did Jesus deal with it? Because that's going to show me how God feels about it, how God deals with it. And I think when I'm encouraging you to open the Word and get to know Jesus, it's so that you have a greater understanding of how God approaches the very things that we deal with. How does God want me to deal with somebody who thinks different to me politically? What really should be my response? How do I treat them? Do I disinvite them for lunch? Do they no longer come to family things? Do we just avoid it because it's uncomfortable and don't want to talk about it? How does Jesus feel about life, sexuality, being transgender? Does God have an opinion on that stuff? I get you probably have an opinion, but what has formed your opinion? And if I could ask you to think about something, it would be this. Could you have opinions about the things that are happening in life based on how God thinks about it? not just what I've come to, as I've read, as I see a headline, as my friend whispers in my ear. What does God think about these things? How do I know what God thinks about these things? What did Jesus say, think, do about? What's the Father think about someone who's angry towards him, wants nothing to do with religion? How do we treat him? How did the Father treat the Son who ran away? How did the Father treat the Son when the Son came back? Did he make him jump through hoops? Did he make him grovel at his feet? Make him apologize over and over again? Hey, you're not getting back in the house until you do this. Is that how the Father treated the Son that went away? If you want to know how to live life well, look at how Jesus lived. I look at how Jesus lived because that's going to tell me what God thinks about these things. Why? Because Jesus Christ came to show me what God is like. He is God come in the flesh. The second thing that I want us is that's the point I've been trying to make here, is what did Jesus say or do on these things, all right? The second thing I want you to understand then about why you should get to know this Jesus is, as I say here, he's our peacemaker. But the other thing that struck me in this passage, it just was so cool. Look at verse 13. He's rescued us from the dominion of darkness, and he brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. And then I'm going to jump over here, verse 19 again. For God was pleased to have all the fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. To reconcile means to bring two parties that were apart, bring them together, to mend, to take that which was separating them and bridge that gap. We think of peacemakers. Oh, well, the 6-shooter was originally called a peacemaker, right? We think of bringing peace to people by making them submit to us. You have power over them, and so you will make them bow the knee, and that's how you will have peace. No, that's not peace. You might have absence of conflict because you're making them obey, but you don't have peace. Peace means to make two people who were at odds, who had their back to each other, to turn around and face each other and actually extend a hand and be able to shake. We're trying to find peace, right? Middle East. Trying to find peace. What's the answer to peace in the Middle East? I was reading a clip of somebody with the war in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine, and this guy on social media was saying, look, it's just like not humane to like let them keep fighting and let them keep killing each other. We ought to just like, basically the inference is stop the war, let Russia have what they've had, and tell Ukraine just to buck up and accept it. Is that peace? You think the Ukrainian people are going to feel peace? Do you think the people in Greenland feel peace when a bigger power comes and says, hey, we want to absorb you? We're coming in peace. Do you think they feel peace? Missouri taking over the St. Louis Police Department. Do you think there's peace there? We live in such a world that is absent of peace. And I bet you, even with between online and you guys are in here today, I bet you there's 4 or 5 of you that if we could just peel back what's going on in your world, you know you've got people you're not at peace with. You might not be speaking to them. That's our way of dealing with it. I just ain't going to talk to you. I'm going to ignore you. But you don't have peace. Jesus came, 2 times it says, to reconcile, to bring people who were at odds together. He's talking about us with the Father. And I love what he said. I mean, the stuff here that I was seeing here, I showed you. Rescued from darkness, alienated from God. We were enemies. We were doing bad stuff. It says, look at verse 21. You were once alien, you were foreign from God. You were enemies in your mind because of your evil behavior. But now he's reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death. To do what? Here's what Jesus has done. He's forgiven you. He gives you peace. He's made you holy, separate, acceptable to God, free from attack. Now he's reconciled you to present you holy in his sight, without blemish, free from accusation. And if you continue in your faith, established and firm, you won't be moved from the hope that is held out for you in the gospel. What is the big deal about this, Mike? I think there's two levels going on. I think that a lot of times your inner turmoil and conflict that you face come from your own self-deficiencies. You don't like yourself. You got guilt in your own heart. You don't feel good about yourself. You know you've made some poor choices. So you try and mask that either with power. I'm going to trump you. Or you feel inferior and you don't do anything and you're a worm. Neither are from a healthy spot. They're just opposite ends of the same thing. There's a deficiency in your spirit. If God exists, and Jesus came to show us what God is like, and I were to say to you, what does God think about your failings? What does God think about your mess-ups? What does God really think about the real you? Not the one that you put on display. Not the one that you want us to see. The one that goes on when no one sees. What does God think about that person? How would I know? How would I know? Is it just a guess? Because I know what the world says. The world tells you you're a loser. The world says you've messed up. The world says, look, once again, there you go again. You said you were going to stop. You didn't stop. You think you're all high and mighty. Your kids don't like you. You think you're something or other, and your spouse hates your guts. How's that working out for you? What if what Jesus has done in forgiving us, making you holy? There is therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. There's no accusation. You know what times I oftentimes think about? 1 John 2, it says that Jesus stands before the Father and he pleads our cases like a defense attorney. I think there are times in life when Satan gets up and he points the finger and he says, you know about them? God, do you know about them? Do you know what they're like? And Jesus says, I know fully what they're like, and I covered it. There's therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. You don't have to be afraid of your attackers. How do I know that? How do I know that? Because, see, that's going to determine when I get out there on a basketball court. It doesn't happen in church. No one tells me F you in church. Has not happened in a long time, okay? But some other places out there, I hear things, and I get accused of things. How do I respond in that moment? Do I go, yeah, you ain't going to talk to me that way? I get back right in their face? Do I have to? Don't have to. Don't have to. Because I know what God thinks of me. Do I have to be right? I want to be right. Do I have to be right? Do I have to insist on my way? Do you have to insist on your way because you feel somehow a little less if you don't get your way? I always love alpha males. Alpha males feel like they got to drive. Did you ever notice that? Alpha males feel like they got to drive all the time. They got to be in control. I got to be in control of the car. I'm like, go ahead, knock yourself out. I can drive, but no, if you want to, go for it. And that's just something inside of them. There are a lot of little ways this stuff plays out. And Jesus comes along and says, man, I got that. I got you in all your imperfections. I want to show you a different, better way to live. How many of you are following Trump's pardons? I am. I find it interesting. See who gets pardoned next, who's on the list. We all knew about the January 6 people, but continuing to pardon people, right? I can promise you, well, I had to look this up. You realize that if you get a pardon, you're still guilty. You're still guilty, right? If you didn't know that, they're still guilty. They just don't have to suffer the punishment of their crime. The punishment's gone away, but there's still a guilt there, okay? Some of you think that what God does is he just pardons you. Forgiveness takes it and expunges it. It's gone. There's not a claim of guilt on your life because of what Jesus Christ has done for you on the cross. He's made peace for you through his physical body, his death on the cross, so that you now are free to live. That's huge, huge difference, friends, which now gives you the freedom to live differently. And I think this becomes the challenge for most of us. I have type 2 diabetes, not shock. I've said that before. But I wonder if what many of us think is like Jesus comes into our life and like what he wants is to say, Mike, you've got type 2 diabetes and you can't keep drinking 6 cans of regular Coke an hour. You got to change, okay? You can't keep eating all the chocolate cake that you want and all the Easter candy that you want. You've got to change. Now, the challenge becomes, I don't want to change. I like regular Coke. I like jelly beans. I like chocolate cake. I like all those things. And so I want to keep eating them. Christ came into my life to say, Mike, here's the deal. You've got a disease. I'm giving you a shot at something different, but you're going to have to make some changes because you see the value of life lived differently. Spiritually, we embrace Jesus, and here's what we think. We think Jesus is like my spiritual IRA. How many of you have 401? Right? A lot of you do. And what do you do if you're 401? You put a couple percent in, and they match a couple percent, and you just do this over time, and then you hope one day you get a big windfall. Right? And spiritually, you think, I'll put a couple percent in, I'll show up at church once in a while, maybe I'll read my Bible, I'll help the little old lady across the street, I'm putting my 2% in, and I hope God puts 2% in, and one day I'm going to die, and I'm going to get a spiritual windfall. And in the meantime, what Christ wants is that you and we're living all out for him because he's changed us from the inside out. He's given us peace. He's made you holy. He's made you righteous. And we live amongst a people that need that message. But here's the deal. If God doesn't exist, it doesn't matter. Right? If God doesn't exist, it doesn't matter. If God can't be known, it doesn't matter. And that's where you read in the Bible, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. Because it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. I read the story of teams coming up of a professor. I thought this was interesting. His name was Dr. Leach. He had 2 college students in his class under his teaching. Their parents wanted them to get master's degrees, have careers, be successful women. In the course of their college studies, both the young ladies became followers of Jesus. And as they grew in their faith, one of the parents, it ticked them off. Because the parents were ambivalent to religion, but they really weren't sold out on it. And so when they began to hear their daughter talk about doing some other things and just being a successful person with their master's degree, it sort of concerned them. So here's what the Dr. Leach was named. One of the parents, one of the moms called Dr. Leach, thinking that he was the reason that her daughter had become, in the mother's words, religious fanatic. And rather than pursuing the course they had hoped, getting a career and having security. Instead, they were going to go wildly off into the blue following Jesus. The mother said, we wanted our daughter to get a master's degree, start a career, and get something in the bank so she could have some security. So here's how Dr. Leach responded to that mom. Please just let me remind you something. We're all on a little ball of rock called Earth, and we're spinning along through space at zillions of miles per hour. Even if we don't run into anything, eventually we're all going to die. Which means that under every single one of us, there's a trap door that's going to open one day, and we're all going to fall off this ball of rock. And underneath will either be the everlasting arms of God or absolutely nothing. So maybe we can get a master's degree to get some security. But the biggest savings account in the world cannot and will not stop cancer. Your savings account won't stop a traffic accident. I was talking to a young lady this week, Tuesday of last week. A guy rolled through a stop sign and she hit him at about 40 miles an hour. No fault of her own. But she's dealing with the aftermath of when I said, how can I pray for you? She said, do you just pray that like I would not be nervous when I get behind the wheel? Your bank account won't stop someone else from rolling through a stop sign. Your bank account won't stop broken hearts. Your bank account can't give you anything, any of the things that only God can give you, for He's the only significance you can have. He's the only love that you can get and can't lose. I don't know where you sit this morning. Jesus is worth you getting to know. Because as you're living life, you're going to deal with stuff. You're going to face stuff. Who's going to give you the wisdom to live life well? Who's going to give you the strength when you want to quit? Who's going to give you the patience when you feel wronged? Who's going to give you the love for somebody that wants to stab you in the back? There's only one person I know who does that. His name is Jesus Christ. And Paul said, man, let's grow in our knowledge of God. How do we do it? The Word. Be in the Word. Made a case for that. Be in the Word. Hang with people who know Him. You become like your friends, for good or bad. So hang with people who want to get to know God. I'm going to give you a third way that's hard for us. Talk about Him. Share Him. We got an opportunity at Easter. Go talk to our neighbors. Love on them. But maybe it's going to be in 3 weeks leading up to Easter, the biggest religious holiday of the season. Look for opportunities. Pray for opportunities that God will give you to talk about your love for God. And you don't got to beat people over the head with it, but just being willing to have conversations about things of faith is a cool thing. And you'll find that as you talk about, I'm just going to say it this way. The more I talk about my family, my feelings for them, the feelings intensify and grow. And the more I distance myself from my family, I can say whatever I want, but if I'm not talking about them, the passion here fades. I think the same thing is true in our walk with God. Let's be willing to talk about it. Let's stand and sing with these guys.